I am going to make my family's favorite sourdough sandwich bread. So I thought I'd show you the whole process. I have another video on how to maintain the starter for the sourdough. And so I am using that starter in this recipe. So let's get started. Okay, so I have my starter in the bowl. It's about 2/3 of a cup. I'm very much not measurement driven. So I dumped a bunch of it in there and it's nice and bubbly. I know it's active. I'm gonna take my rings off because it does become a sticky process. So I have my starter in the bowl. I have about 2 2/3 cups, closer to 3 cups of water. And pour that in the bowl and set that to the side. And then I'm gonna come in underneath and see if it floats. And there, my starter does float. That is the sign that it's nice and active and ready to be used. So I have my water, my starter. Next I'm gonna add about 4 tablespoons of honey, and my honey is actually crystallized, but that is okay. It will mix in just fine. It gives it just a nice little sweet flavor, not overbearingly sweet, but a very nice flavor to add to it. Just get every bit of the honey there. Like I said, a lot of people measure and weigh and all of that. I don't, and I've made it so much it becomes a feel, and I'm going to show you that feel here. I have a tablespoon of salt. I like to use pink salt. That tends to work the best. It's not iodized. And then I have 3 tablespoons of olive oil. And I believe the olive oil is different than normal sourdough, just crusty loaf bread. The olive oil, I think, gives it that soft sandwich bread feel, which my family really likes. So I'm gonna mix this all together. I'm gonna use one hand for it. That way, the salt gets dissolved, the honey gets worked in because it is crystallized, and you can use regular granulated sugar in this recipe. I just tend not to use sugar for any recipes because we have so much honey on hand that I use honey. It's just healthier for the family, and like I said, it does give it a really good flavor. So everything's dissolved in this bowl as much as I can. I can feel little particles. I'm just gonna make sure that I get those worked in. Okay, so the recipe calls for 7 to 8 cups of flour. I use a bread flour that's unbleached. Unbleached is key. I like to use the organic bread flour from Costco, but as long as it's unbleached, you can do that. Some people add a little rye to their flour mix. I like to use just the unbleached flour. So I'm gonna start putting some of that in. Like I said, I'm not huge on measuring, simply for the fact that it's more of a feel. The humidity in the air does influence how much flour you use. That's why I don't get stuck with measurements. I know what to feel for. So I'm gonna mix this in, and working the gluten in, working the flour really does pay off with the texture of the bread in the end. So I make sure that I really work this really well, and it takes a little bit of time, but if you're patient and really get into it, it feels good. Very sticky. Kids like to help with this as well. It's like a fun project, almost like a Play-Doh, but then they get to enjoy the bread after. So the key with the sandwich bread is that I'll mix it up really well right now, work it, build some gluten in there, because that's what the sourdough starter consumes, and then it'll make it more digestible for us. That's why sourdough bread is healthier alternative to normal yeasty bread. And a lot of people do add yeast to their sourdough recipes. I choose not to because the sourdough starter that I have is very yeasty, very active, and it makes a beautiful bread. So I'm just gonna work this and pull it, make sure that I have all the flour worked into it. And it's a loose dough. It's kind of shaggy, and that's okay. That's the way you want it to be, because as it sits and rises and does its magic, it becomes just a nice smooth dough over time as the yeast eats what it needs to eat and the gluten. And so I'm gonna work this. The more you work it in the beginning, the first hour, I mean, I'm not gonna do this for an hour, but in the first couple hours of just sitting if you come back and just kind of pull it like this, knead it a little bit, it makes a beautiful loaf of bread. So we're getting pulled together here. It looks a little wet. I could probably add a little more flour to it, but I'm just gonna see how it comes together, see if I need to. Sometimes I start thinking it needs a little more flour, but then it turns out that once it sits a little bit, it's actually a really nice dough. Like I said, it seems shaggy right now, but it's a feel. So if it's too wet, yes, I will add more flour, but I actually am starting to think that this is probably perfect. So here I am, just really working this. A lot of people will knead their dough. I'm more of the pull and fold it over. And that is a method that a lot of people use with sourdough, is pull and fold it over. Pull and fold it over. It's just making tension in the dough. So what I'm gonna do after this is I'm gonna cover this and let it sit on the counter until the dough is doubled in size. From there, I will divide it into 2 loaves, and I like to use the loaf pans for my sandwich bread, like a traditional sandwich bread. So I'm gonna get it all off the sides, bring it together, and then I'm gonna just cover it with cling wrap on the counter. Let me look at the temperature here. It is 71 degrees in this kitchen, so I'm guessing it will take 8-ish hours. I'm gonna let it sit, and when it's doubled in size, I'll be back to show you what we do from there. That's when we'll just divide it up and put it into loaf pans, and then put it in the fridge overnight, or up to 48 hours actually, to develop that sourdough flavor, that sour taste, and also it becomes more and more digestible the longer it sits in the fridge. But the first step here is get all this together. Like I said, it looks shaggy. However, it'll just really smooth out the longer it sits. So once it's doubled in size, I don't want to overproof it. I don't want to go too long on the counter, but once it's doubled in size, that's when I'll come back and divide it into loaves. And I will show you that process after it's sat. Hey there, I'm back. My dough has been resting in this bowl covered for about, I don't know, it's probably been close to 10 hours. It's pretty cool in the kitchen. It cooled off in the kitchen, so it's nice, and it has more than doubled in size. So it's a beautiful dough. So I'm gonna take that out, and it's enough to make 2 loaves. So I'm gonna take that out and cut it into 2 different sections, and I'll show you how I do that. So it's nice and fermenty. It smells really yeasty, which is really nice. And it's nice and sticky. So I'm gonna dump it out, and you can see the bubbles in it. It looks like a big giant sourdough starter, which is neat. So I'm gonna take all the dough out, and I have a little flour on my board here because it's really wet right now, and I don't want it to stick everywhere. So I'm gonna take this out, and I'll scrape that bowl here in a minute. So I have a little extra flour. I'm just gonna put it on my dough, just because it is so sticky. But that means that it really has a nice rise to it, which is our goal here. Now I have greased my bread pan. I've greased the sides also, because when it grows up and over the sides, it does tend to stick. So I have a nice layer of grease on that. I sprayed it down. Actually, I use some oil, but you can spray it as well. So I'm gonna cut this dough in half. Like I said earlier in the episode, measurements are just not my thing. I just eyeball it, and that works for me. If you want to be precise, you can weigh it out, weigh each side out, and that works as well. So I'm just gonna bring it together, and it's gonna deflate a little bit here. But that is okay, because once it rests in the fridge in the bread pan, it will get big again. So here I have my dough divided into 2 different loaves. Just need a little flour, just simply for the fact that it is quite sticky. Now, if you're worried about the gluten content, if you're intolerant to gluten, that is okay. It will have time to rest and eat the gluten from this additional flour because it's going to be in the fridge for 24 to 48 hours before we bake it. So, or some people do use like a rice flour so it doesn't stick. So I'm just going to roll this up into a nice loaf so it can go in my bread pan. Here we go. And what I'm going to do here is just put it in that greased loaf. There I have it in my greased loaf pan. There it is before. I'm going to cover it, and then we're going to put that in the fridge for at least 24 to 48 hours, depending on when I'm going to bake bread. But that way it has time to get that nice sourdough flavor, and it will just rest a little more, and it'll be a stronger bread because of that. And then I will show you when I take it out of the fridge, and then we'll be ready to bake it in 24 hours. So we'll check back in 24 hours. Hey guys, okay, so my bread has been in the fridge for 48 hours, and it actually grew so much that it came out of the pan. It grew out the side. So, which is so exciting for me because you can see how much it's grown, and it's gonna be airy and fluffy. I'm gonna take it out. My goal is to not deflate it too much. Just take it out of the package, covered, it's nice and soft. There we are. And I think so that it doesn't get overdone on the sides, I'm just gonna trim those sides off and use them. I'll bake that as well, so that way it doesn't burn too much. There we are, put those aside. Do the same on this side. Just, those tend to burn and get really dark. Just trim it up, and it doesn't deflate because it's nice and set up because it's had 48 hours in the fridge. Okay, so you can see the nice bubbles on the top, and it's gonna be lovely. There we are. So I'm gonna throw that in the oven at 350. It'll take about an hour, and I'll show you that when it's done. Okay, you can see all the extra bubbles in here with the bread. So it's going in the oven at 350 degrees. I'm gonna put it in the center. It'll take 45 minutes to an hour, and we will check back then. It's been in about 45 minutes, so I'm gonna take it out and let it cool. Okay, the bread's been in the oven about 45 minutes. Check it out, it's nice. It's very brown, perfectly golden brown. Airy, you can tell it's airy. So we're just gonna let it cool on the drying rack. I'll show you all sides of it here. Sandwich bread that our family absolutely loves. After it cools, we will cut and enjoy for dinner. Okay, so I've loosened all the sides, and it's important to take it out of this pan to dry, or to cool, because it will get too moist in there if we don't take it out of the pan to cool. So I'm just going to take it out here. I've loosened the sides, hopefully it comes out. Sometimes they stick a little bit. I did grease the pan. There we are. So I'm just gonna take it out of the pan. See all the steam comes out. I'm just gonna, there we are. And here we are. Okay. It's cooling for dinner. And here it is, all sliced up, ready for sandwiches or just bread and butter, whatever anyone wants.